Hello, chess friends, and welcome to out of Chess Channel, and welcome to a very special tournament that's played now parallelly to the TCEC Season 21. It's a great tournament played by top engines in the so-called Danish Gambit, and we have covered recently some Danish Gambit games on my YouTube chess channel. I've created also a separate playlist. I think you can really study the sharp opening, because I still think that this Danish Gambit is sort of an unexplored opening. I think you'll not see so many great games in the Danish Gambit, so you can maybe surprise your opponent. It's, I think, slightly better than maybe the King's Gambit. I think the King's Gambit is more popular, but I simply don't like this f4 idea in the King's Gambit. For instance, when you weaken the pawn structure in front of the king too much. The Danish Gambit is different. We're playing basically the gambit on the queen side, and that's a huge difference with the move d4 and then c3. Okay, you're giving up some pawns, but in order just to get some piece activities. And we'll cover also, I think, here in the video, a great defense. It's a so-called Schlechter defense. I think you can use the defense in order to simplify the game, in order to equalize the game in an early stage of the game. But still, there are really some sharp lines for white, for black. So as I said, I still think that we should try sometimes this Danish Gambit, because the surprise element in this sharp opening is really brilliant. And I wanted to show also a brilliant game played by Stockfish and against another top engine, Komodo. Be prepared here. Stockfish, the new Stockfish engine in the Danish Gambit. This is really, again, 6-6 check. So let's check out now the game here. E4 played by Stockfish. We have E5. We have now D4. E takes D4. The Danish Gambit is on the board. Really wild stuff. And now comes the move C3. This is basically the main stuff. You don't want to recapture with the queen, of course. Then you get knight to C6. Although this is still playable for white, for black. But still, we want to play the sharp opening. Of course, C3 we have here. And after D takes C3, here Stockfish plays the move bishop to C4. And here black simply takes another pawn. The game was prearranged to this particular move, to the move bishop to B2. And in my opinion, as I said, the best continuation for black here is this so-called Schlechter defense, because after move d5, if you take, of course, with the pawn, then you're blocking out your lights for bishop, so you would be pretty much forced to take out with the bishop here. And now the main line would be something like knight to f6, and now the fun already starts. We have here this tactic bishop to f7, but it's not such a problem here for black. Okay, black has to take, but you lose the queen, but it's only temporarily, because here bishop to b4 can happen, and here after queen to d2, bishop to d2, knight to d2, the game is basically equalized. I still think that white and black have equal chances to win the game. So this is the so-called Schlechter defense. This is the main line of the Schlechter defense. But here in the continuation of the game, after bishop to b2, the Komodo engine tried now the move bishop to b4. This is the so-called Copenhagen defense. In the continuation of the game here, Stockfish played the move knight to c3. And okay, you see now Stockfish gave up 2 pawns, but already 3 pieces are out. The bishop, the knight, and the second bishop are out. Now queen to b3 is happening, you see, aiming towards the f7 square, knight to f3. So the fast development that we get is a great compensation for the 2 pawns that we have lost in the beginning. So in the continuation, we have knight to f6 here by Komodo. We have queen to b3. Here bishop takes c3, and now after queen to c3, here castling play by Komodo, knight to f3. And okay, you cannot take, of course, that's the main tactic here. You cannot take the pawn on e4 because you get checkmated on g7. In the continuation of the game, after knight to f3, we have now c6. Even if you try something like rook to e8, maybe to get your rook here on the same file where already the king is. Now, I think knight to g5 is a great move here, because with the problem of h6, you cannot do that because your f7 is simply too weak. So you would be pretty much forced to play something like rook to f8 or rook to e7. Then also some ideas like e5 can happen. Even queenside castling, I think, would be here the great opportunity. So as I said, I still think that black is simply tactically lost here. So that's why after move knight to f3, we see now this move c6, and it's not actually a preparation to play the move d5. d5 is not the possibility, because after e takes d5, and here you see you cannot always take out with the knight, because we saw the problems here around the square g7. So but the move c6 is not the preparation to play the move d5. It's actually a preparation to play the move b5, to kick away here the bishop from this very active square on c4. So here in the continuation, we have now queenside castling, and that's actually a great theoretical novelty here by Stockfish. We have seen also some other games by Stockfish, but they were played in a different way. Here queenside castling is actually a great idea, because although it's seems so that your king is naked because you don't have so many pawns in front of your king, but that's actually a great move, because when we think about it harder, we have talked about the 3 stages in the opening that you have to play. There are these 3 stages. The first stage is of course developing the minor pieces, which Stockfish already did. Then it's the second stage is of course securing the king by castling, which again Stockfish already did. And then the third stage is the rook connection by maneuvering the queen from the first rank. So already Stockfish did also this third element in the opening. So that's why the fast development again that we get is simply, I think, too much to handle here for black. Look at this position, all of the pieces really on natural squares. Now rook to e1 can happen. We can try even g4 h4 attacks just in order to open new files, new diagonals against black's king. So again, this is really a great setup by Stockfish. So in the continuation we have now b5. If you try something like knight to a6 to maybe get your knight somehow into the game, maybe even try knight to c5, I think rook to e1 is the natural move. Then e5 could happen, then maybe even e6, simply pushing further in the continuation of the game, maybe even something like knight to g5. So I still think that white will always find great ways to attack this position further, and it's actually not so hard even to find the best next move, because we're playing basically natural chess moves. So the getting the rook of course towards the center would be a natural idea in chess. So after move queenside castling, we have now b5 instead of this move knight to a6 here by Komodo, and Stockfish simply plays bishop to d3, which is a great idea, because with ideas of e5 this diagonal could be liberated. Then maybe there are even some Greek if tactics with bishop to h7 and knight to g5. Of course not possible immediately, but as a long-term tactic it could actually work if the position gets into this some wild tactics. So here after move bishop to d3, we have now a5 by Komodo, and now comes h4, immediately attacking the king side, because there's nothing that we have to wait now. I still think when you have the pieces on the best squares like white has already, then it's simply time to push a pawn. So you see, I don't see a better square for the queen, I don't see a better square for the bishop, I don't see a better square for this bishop. The knight is centralized, so now it's really time to push some pawns. So after move h4, we have knight to a6, maybe b4 here would be a very interesting idea, but here I think again white can find some attacking opportunities with the move queen to c2. So black would be pretty much forced to even trade off the light square bishop, but now e5 is a serious threat after bishop to d3, rook to d3, and now the knight has to move. But now with knight to g5, this is, I think, again really tactically lost here for black. Now even rook to g3 are opportunities, simply opening this long diagonal here against the h7. Even if you try to cover it with the g6, then I still think that you opening simply too much your dark squares in front of black's king, so you cannot protect the light squares and dark squares. So here, even with opportunities to play the move h5, rook to g3, as I said, there's simply too much pressure against black's king. So in the continuation of the game, after move h4, here knight to a6. So you see, black is lacking in development. Black has some extra pieces, but cannot develop the pieces immediately. So here in the continuation, after move knight to a6, now Stockfish plays the move h5, because if you play now a passive move like queen to e7, this is now the serious threat, the move h6, because the move h6 is opening now the dark square diagonal. Now black would be forced to play something like b4, but still white will simply attack further the dark squares. Queen to d4 or queen to d2 are now ideas. After move queen to d4, okay, black could attack further the queen to e3, and now after the move g6, here we have an immediate threat, and the game is simply over here. It's simply a lost game here for black. The knight is lost. You cannot move the knight because you lose the queen simply. Here knight to d5, e takes d5 will happen. The queen is still protected by the knight, so no tactics with knight to d5 are possible. So you cannot protect it with your king, because the h6 square, the h6 pawn is covering the g7 square. So here black's knight is simply lost. So really wild stuff. So as said, after move h5, the h6 move is now a serious threat. So that's why here Komodo tried h6 himself. But here Stockfish finds new ways to attack the position. Here we have a g4, e4. If you take now knight to g4, again the serious threat is of course this checkmate on g7. So here b4 played by Komodo. We have queen to e1. The most important thing now for Stockfish is to stay on dark squares to attack further the position with the potential g5 move. In the continuation we have knight to g4, but this only opens the position against the whites against black's king, pardon me. Here rook to g1 is now a great opportunity. In the continuation of the game we have d5, but it's not helping in any way here. White simply plays now this great move knight to h2, because if you take now knight takes h2, it's simply lost game. Rook takes g7. You see all of these files, all of these diagonals are open. King to h8, now e takes d5 with ideas of queen to e4 and also deliver checkmate on h7. You would be forced to lock somehow this the other diagonal, you see, because the other threat is of course also this cover attack with rook to f7 or rook to g2 or similar ideas. So that's why here f6 has to be played. But now comes this other diagonal as a threat, now queen to e4. Now you have to play f5, but now comes this down, rook to d7. You can cover with the queen, bishop to f6, rook to f6, and this is checkmate. So this was a great tactical preparation here by Stockfish. After move knight to h2, here Komodo tried to protect the knight by delivering a check, but it's not a problem. Simply king to b1 solves now the position in the game. We have knight to c5, but now after knight to g4 we have bishop to g4, and now f3 simply traps the bishop. Here in the continuation we have knight takes d3, we have rook to d3, queen to h5, and now rook to g4. Again the g7 is hanging, so that's why f6 has to be played. We have now queen to g1 attacking further the weakness on g7, and here g5 played by Komodo. We have e takes d5, and here after queen to g6, queen to d1 protecting everything, and now rook to d8. Here Stockfish plays now simply king to a1, getting out of this tactical mess here on this long diagonal. The threat was of course rook takes d5, so here king to a1. So far the king is not endangered, and in the continuation of the game we have rook to d6, we have rook to d4, we have the c5, rook to c4, rook to c8, and now f4. Very important now to stop this pawn storm on the king side, because these are three connected pawns, these are two connected pass pawns here. So in order to get something out of this, of course Stockfish is trying to split the pawns to create further weaknesses, because if you take, then these pawns are simply isolated and there are long-term weaknesses. So after move f4 we have queen to f5 by Komodo, we have f takes g5, h takes g5, a4, we have b takes a3 en passant, and now bishop to a3 of course gets into the game very actively. Now the c5 is also a long-term weakness. A4 we have rook takes c5, rook takes c5, bishop to c5, rook to d7, and now bishop to b4. Again we have queen to e4, and now rook to d4, keeping the position glued together, keeping the pieces compact here in the center of the board. In the continuation we have queen to e3, d6, pushing the pawn further, king to g7, rook to king to a2, we have queen to e6, and now king to a3, king to g6, queen to d3, a new check. We have now f5 covering, and now rook to d5. The position is a little bit paralyzed for black. Black cannot move pieces. Of course, when you move the queen, then the pawn is hanging. If you move the rook, then we can simply push the pawn further. So it's simply sort of a Zugzwang position here for black. So after move rook to d5, we have king to f6, we have bishop to a5, king to g7, and now king takes a4. Here Stockfish found a great way how to capture the pawn. Of course king to h6 here, and now bishop to c7. This is very important because now the bishop is protecting the pawn. This is now a great setup. The rook is a little bit locked here. The rook has only the 7th rank to move somehow. Of course you cannot maneuver the rook to d8, and now the pieces of whites can play much more freely. The rook can play much freely, and also here also the queen can attack black's king simply further in the continuation of the game. So here after move bishop to c7, we have king to g6, king to b5, g4, we have queen to d4, we have g3, now queen to d3, we have king to g2, and now queen to g3 attacking the king, and now simply taking out the pawn. This is now of course a completely winning game here for Stockfish. Here in the continuation, king to g7, queen to f3, we have queen to d7, a check, but not a problem. You don't have of course perpetual checks. Here we have rook to g5, king, rook to e5, threatening of course rook to e7, so that's why here queen to a4, we have queen to h1 check, check, king to g8, and now a new check, king to h8, and now simply pushing the pawn further. You have several checks here, but you, again, I'm pointing out you don't have perpetuals. Queen to a6 is now the last logical check here. We have removed king to b8. We have rook to b6. Here Stockfish simply takes, bishop takes b6, queen to b6, and now simply covering. We have queen to d6, now king to c8, queen to f8, and now a promotion. Queen takes d8, king takes d8, and now here after move rook to e8, it was a checkmate. So great game here again by Stockfish in the Danish gambit. The really brilliant attack, immortal diagonals, immortal really files, immortal opening position ideas here by Stockfish. Again, brilliant chess. I really love this game. So as I said, if you want to study this Danish gambit more, I've created already a separate playlist, so you can check it out. Try also some different ideas for white, for black, some good defenses, and also some good attacking ideas here for white. So I think it's, as I said, an unexplored opening line. You can check it out, maybe surprise your opponent in an early stage of the game. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. If you want to study the Danish gambit more, here's the link to our playlist. And if you want to see more brutal attacks like this, check out my commented chess games played by computers with some more Stockfish, Alpha Zero, Little C0 games, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.